The number of arms held by various militias, the inability of their respective governments to police the actions of these groups, and the proliferation of groups armed by sale of valuable resources in their lands like oil, diamonds, uranium, and the like, all fuel the increasing inequalities and marginalization of these peoples, which become fertile grounds for all forms of extremism. We discover that states cannot solve these transnational problems unless there is a platform of cooperation among states and non-state actors. Such cooperation can only come, however, by departing from the national, local framework that we have been used to. Ironically, to strengthen the nation, we have to go beyond the nation state. Values are plural. While the United States is at the forefront encouraging all nations to go democratic, we often forget that the same democratic ideal should also allow for the creation of channels for relating different values and accommodating each of them and finding means of resolving differences that interfere with the efforts to understand and be in allowance of our differences. Think of how much more changes can be effected by community programs designed to socialize our young to the values of tolerance, trust, accommodation for others who are different, respect for others' people's beliefs and ways of doing things. Think of how much more changes can be effected if militaries around the world attend programs designed to understand each other's meanings, not necessarily to homogenize their views, but for their thoughts to come into some shared understanding. Think of how many more changes we can make if we pay more attention to the low politics area of cooperation along functional areas like science, instead of the high politics area of sovereignty and territorial issues. It is not an accident that when we talk about the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the word universal is attached to the word declaration and not to the word human rights. This only demonstrates quite clearly that up till this time, we have yet to agree in regard to what human rights consist of and which human right should be the benchmark for the rest of the world. It has often been said that compassion is the highest form of understanding. And yet, as we look around at the many conflicts around the world for which valuable resources are being expended, there is little understanding of the many differences that seem to divide us. Often, our descriptions of ourselves and others are underpinned by versuses. Muslims versus the non-Muslims, the developed economies versus the non-developed economies, the center versus the peripheries, the G20 versus the rest of the economically disadvantaged world. It seems as if the kind of comfort or good life that the G20 countries would like to give their citizens cannot be shared and extended to the rest of the world, or are the rest of the world going to be benchmarked by another kind of good life? With the increasing connectivities of our world, it is unfortunate that our minds and consciousness are still locked in the us versus them framework. There seems to be scant accommodation for those who are deemed different, and unfortunately, those deemed different are also deemed unacceptable. Thus, the classification of the United States of rogue states, axis of evil, which have significantly, those labels which have significantly in the past determined American foreign policies towards this state and determined its inclusions and exclusions. Sadly, while the military aspect of the Cold War between the former USSR and the United States has ended, the psychology of the divide has not diminished in the minds of the major protagonists. Unfortunately, while we confront new security challenges, the Cold War frame of antagonisms and mutual suspicions linger and still inform policies and strategies of states. The militaries of the various states need a major rethink in terms of their mandates. If war is rendered obsolescent, then what use would legitimate armed forces be? The new security threats need a new security framework. Since the many challenges are beyond the nation-state's jurisdiction, the means to confront them will also be found beyond the nation-state. What is needed now is a regional, proactive institutional responses to set up regimes of rules and regulations that will confront the new challenges of security. Refugees, internally displaced people, disease pandemics, and the like. I had written a paper for the OECD detailing the creation of a regional rapid response force on disaster management. And in that paper, I outlined how the military and the various other disaster responders and other experts should come together, train together, and design cooperative and collaborative platforms for their work. I recognize the creation of this force, among others, as rather crucial in meeting our present security challenges. If we look, for example, at the 1990 earthquake that resulted in massive loss of human lives and infrastructure in the Philippines, the Kobe earthquake in Japan, the 2004 tsunami that hit many of the Asia-Pacific countries, in all these major disasters, many of the foreign assistance came, but they did not have any protocol to guide them. So there were so many days lost, and most everything that had happened on an ad hoc basis. While it can be granted that there are various trainings and multi-country exercises that are going on, in the region, it cannot be denied that in the absence of both a regional legal framework and enforcement and implementing protocols, the same ad hocitis will be the way to confront the many disaster, pandemics, and other security challenges. Then we have to talk about other challenges like population aging, which have to be addressed as they not only strain the national resources of each country in terms of pensions, health services, and the likes, but they also become sources of conflict because the states' immigration policies and labor migration refuse to change to meet the requirements of aging societies. In 2050, there will only be one continent that will have a young population, and that continent is Africa. The rest of the world will be aging. Indeed, the world has changed significantly, and we have to change with it. The preponderance of US military power can be harnessed to bring about a better life for everyone, without exception. The military now has a new mandate, and we call it armed social work. This means that while the combined NATO and US forces in Afghanistan and Pakistan are running after lawbreakers, they cannot but be in the forefront of getting the cooperation of participation of both the Afghan leadership and the citizenry, its local police force, to bring about an environment for some order and peaceful lives to prosper in these lands. Or, we ask ourselves, is the military intended for nation building? It is a truism that economic activities to improve the quality of life of peoples cannot happen simultaneous with violence and lack of order. What Admiral Mullen and Lieutenant General McChrystal had observed in Afghanistan cannot but be the basic